What's up, Lions? Brian Nichols here, and welcome to my Thursday edition of the Brian Nichols Show, now airing right here on the Lions of Liberty Network. And don't worry, I'm still dropping episodes on Mondays and Fridays over on my regular feed, but every Thursday you'll find me right here bringing that same Liberty meets real world messaging to the Lions of Liberty audience. And don't forget, every other week, I'm teaming up with the awesome quartet, including yours truly, of Brian McWilliams, John Odermatt, and Lou Perez for our brand new roundtable show, Politics. It's our no-holds-barred review of the week's headlines and the bloodsuckers in Washington, because these ticks don't stop unless we shine a light on them. So glad to be part of the pride. All right, let's get into it.
Well, let me ask you a question. When you leave the state of nature, right? The state of nature is a state of utmost liberty, right? Unparalleled. And so obviously you're leaving the state of nature, you're departing to a state where there's not so much liberty, right? There has to be a reason that people are renouncing this incredible liberty that so many people believe to be the ultimate purpose of the state, right? To kind of promote and enshrine and protect the liberty of the populace, right? And that reason is essentially security, to kind of cut to the chase, right?
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here at another fun-filled episode, yes, of the Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by Cardio Miracle, the best heart health supplement in the world. You want to learn more? Stick around. We're going to talk about that more later in today's episode. But first, our neighbors to the north, Canada, are they, in fact, a national security threat to America? Yeah, let's discuss that. And I can't do that alone. So joining me today from Young Voices is William Barclay. William, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you on the show, bud. Looking forward to digging into all things Canada, which is a country that it does have a near and dear spot in my heart, namely because I lived right across the border from Canada up in northern New York for, over 2 decades. So very familiar with our neighbors to the north. But before we dig into all things Canada, is it a failed state, economic consequences, and more, William, do us a favor. Introduce yourself here to the Brian Nichols Show audience, if you'd be so kind.
Hey, thanks so much. So I'm a political theorist and private consultant, as well as, like you're saying, contributor for Young Voices. Presented my work all around the world. I've been published in a whole bunch of places, a whole bunch of newspapers, peer-reviewed journals. And like you're saying, I'm here with you today to discuss how the tariffs that President Trump has imposed on Canada are not really predicated on economics so much as Canada becoming a dire national security threat to the United States of America.
And I'm sure like 80% of the folks who are more in that squishy middle or even more left-leaning side of the political aisle here in the audience, they're probably hearing you say that and say, what? A national security threat? Canada? William, say it ain't so. But actually, if we go into your article that we're going to talk about here today from the Political Insider, you paint a picture, William, and it's not exactly a rosy one. Looks like Canada has been facing some pretty tough domestic issues, even though they're a hop, skip, and a jump from a lot of us here in the continental United States. It's an issue I think a lot of us are actually very unaware of. So set the stage for us, William. What's happening up in Canada, and why are you arguing it's on the edge of becoming a failed state?
Well, I think to start it displays the two quintessential hallmarks of any failing or failed state, right? Number one, it's unable to maintain a monopoly on the legitimate use of force inside its borders, and it's unable to secure its own borders, right? And this has allowed a lot of the national security issues that have started to reside and inhabit the Canadian state to leak over and dribble over into the United States of America and start to wreak havoc there. I think all species of crime skyrocketed in Canada since the advent of the Trudeau government way back when. We're happy to see them gone. But since they were in power, violent crime has gone up by 39%. And I think the Violent Crime Severity Index, which is an indicator that they use here in Canada, is at its highest point since 2007. So things really aren't looking good from that perspective. And like President Trump has pointed out, we've got fentanyl, again, migrating over the border from Canada to the United States of America. And the big issue there is that Canada has gone from being a place where fentanyl kind of passes through, or transported through, to a place that produces fentanyl, right? I think very recently we had our biggest bust in Canadian history. And so we very much changed from a transporter to a hub, a global hub of fentanyl export.
So William, one thing you just outlined there, I've actually heard quite a few folks make this issue seem like it's not a big issue, because they say, well, what? 40 pounds of illegal drugs or fentanyl were captured going over the Canadian border. I think it was last calendar year. I could be wrong with the specific timeframes, but the argument saying, well, why are we spending so much time, energy, and effort, William, focusing on our neighbors to the north? Shouldn't we be spending more time, energy, and efforts focused on our neighbors to the south, being what we've seen taking place in Mexico? I'm going to dare say that your article paints the picture that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but help maybe dispel that narrative that just because it's only 40 pounds of fentanyl, it's not that big of a deal.
Well, it's not only 40 pounds. I think that's the thing. Since 2022 alone, domestic fentanyl production in Canada, so that's fentanyl that's produced in Canada, not just passes through, has skyrocketed by more than 300%. And recently, I think it was this year, police in Canada seized 96 million doses of fentanyl that were about to cross the border. So it's not just 40 pounds. I think that's just simply not true, right? That's where we can start. And I think, again, the issue is very much where that arrow is pointed. And it's pointed towards fentanyl production, right? The cartels have realized that Canada is a happy home for this kind of stuff, especially with our porous borders, right? And they kind of go hand in hand. They've realized that we've lost control on our justice system. I think it's McDonald Laurier Institute had a quote in their last justice report, or which is an evaluation of the Canadian justice system here, that Canada appeared to have given up on its legal responsibilities and kind of enforcing the law here. And that's quite serious. I think that the cartels and criminal organizations have definitely recognized that they're able to set up shop here. And then when they need to export fentanyl from here to the United States or elsewhere in the world, they're able to do so quite easily. And I think that's very much the problem. That arrow is pointed towards more production here in Canada domestically and more export to other corners of the world, not just America.
So let's talk about this, because I hear a lot of folks who like to tout their principles and how pure they are and how perfectly ideological they are, right? They look at Canada and they say, well, they are very similar to us culturally. This just seems like we're inviting a conflict with our Canadian neighbors, right? We're leveraging tariffs on them. We're not embracing a true open border to help with the free exchange of goods and services. I hear this argument all day long, and elephant in the room, a lot of it's taking place in the confines of libertarian Facebook groups, which we know, William, of course, that is where the only best ideas of truth and purity are outlined. But just let's help set the stage here from the ideological standpoint, William, because I found myself over the past few years very much drifting away from what you consider to be the pure libertarian mentality to saying, hold on, we have to live in this thing called the real world, right? And we're seeing a lot of other countries react to what we're seeing take place here in America. And I'm sorry, idealism and ideology are not going to fix the issues we're seeing here. So what are you seeing in your kind of analysis of the American-Canadian relationship? Is it that we're not libertarianing, there we go, or principling hard enough? Or are we starting to see the reality of maybe, I'm not going to call them flawed perspectives, but well-intentioned perspectives, right, actually being slapped in the face with this thing we like to call reality?
Well, let me ask you a question. When you leave the state of nature, right? The state of nature is a state of utmost liberty, right? Unparalleled. And so obviously you're leaving the state of nature, you're departing to a state where there's not so much liberty, right? There has to be a reason that people are renouncing this incredible liberty that so many people believe to be the ultimate purpose of a state, right? To kind of promote and enshrine and protect the liberty of its populace, right? And that reason is essentially security, to kind of cut to the chase, right? Liberty, all of our personal rights are all predicated on security, right? And once a state loses this ability to secure the rights of its populace, namely their liberty, their freedom, all these great things, that really does have to be its fundamental concern. It's very much an order of operations. You can have the rest of it for sure, and you should obviously endeavor towards them at all times, but you need to be able to protect and secure them. This is something that Locke, Tocqueville, Montesquieu all agree upon. And I think that's very much what's happened here. The United States of America's security, its national security, being fundamentally compromised by these flows of international migration from states such as Canada, such as Mexico, and elsewhere in the world. And everything that they brought with them. And President Trump quite rightly, said that the United States of America needs to reestablish national security within its borders before it can start to think about promoting liberty and these human rights, both internally and externally, to this idealistic perspective that we were just talking about. And I think that's very much just the case. Like the United States of America needs to take the necessary steps to ensure its own national security before it can, again, promote liberty internally and externally to that idealistic level.
It almost feels, William, that for every person who's saying what you're saying in a very level-headed perspective, there is an equal, if not maybe just more vocal side that's saying, well, no, anything we do in the pursuit of securing our national interests is actually, it's a hate crime, right? Like, and this is where I get so stuck with, I call it the goofballism, right? Where you have the goofball folks out there, whether they're the most pure libertarians or the most pure progressives or leftists, or even on the other side now, the most pure magatarians or the purest anarchists. Doesn't matter to me. When you get so intoxicated with the ism, right, you can almost start to you're jumping past the reality, right, in pursuit of trying to obtain your perfect world, your utopia, which we make fun of our friends on the left, the communist perspective of, well, everything, if we just were able to control all these variables, it would be a perfect communist utopia. And we say, exactly, you can't control all these variables, hence the beauty of the marketplace. Exactly. And yet I see the exact same perspective with a lot of our friends in the libertarian camp. And I'm going to pick on them because that's where a lot of my prior political beliefs are rooted in. And by the way, I'm very much still philosophically a libertarian, but there's a lot of areas I say, hey guys, we have to really reconsider, if not the way that we sell and message these different solutions. I would say on the other side, we have to really better understand, are the solutions we're promoting actually making things better, or are they making things better in a vacuum where we do control all the variables, right? And I had this conversation with, throughout today's episode, we've been talking a lot about what happens when a country ignores its most basic responsibilities. Like securing its borders or keeping people safe. But let's be real. How often do we personally do the same thing? I mean, we get so caught up in chasing freedom, liberty, politics, you name it, that we forget to take care of one thing that actually keeps us in the game: our health. And that's why I've been using Cardio Miracle for the past 2 years. And I'm telling you, it's been a game changer. Because it's not just another supplement. It's a full spectrum nitric oxide support that your body needs to optimize heart health, circulation, energy, and heck, even immune support. Think of it like this. If liberty starts with security, then your freedom to live well starts with taking care of your heart. So do me a favor. Don't wait for a personal health border crisis to hit. Scan that QR code over my shoulder or head to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout for 15% off your order. One more time, that's coupon code TBNS at checkout for 15% off your order. Because your health isn't just personal, it's foundational. Now, let's get back to the show. Ethan Brown? No, I forget. It doesn't matter. It does matter, but we were talking about tariffs a few episodes ago, and I was having this conversation. From Young Voices, yeah. Help me out here. What's his name?
I think you might have it. I was talking to him today. I was talking to him today. I was on your show.
Aiden Grogan. There we go.
You remember him?
Yeah, Aiden Grogan. Sorry, and Aiden and I have had a good. Yeah, we had a good back and forth. But like even Aiden was able to come to the table and say, "Listen, everything I'm talking about is in the pursuit of an end goal." And I'm like, "Yeah, me too." And I'm seeing the end goal we have right now not really in our favor. Now that's a battle that I've had a lot with my libertarian friends. But you look at, in this case, right, you're talking about Canada not from an economic standpoint, but actually from a safety security standpoint. America and a lot of folks therein have this perspective of live and let live, and I very much embrace the old Ben Franklin quote: the society who tries to secure security in the name of freedom will, I'm going to butcher it, will have neither and sacrifice both, or it's something like that. Oh man, all my libertarian friends who say he's not a real libertarian, he doesn't know his own quotes. But no, when you look at folks like Ben Franklin, right, like that is the ethic that we carry forward, but there very much is the, okay, does that ethic hold true to the situation you find yourself in, right? It's something, if you have as a standard of saying, hey, eating healthy, losing weight, that's the best way to live your life. Okay, great. But what if you're anorexic, right? Maybe you need to eat some more calories, right? And in the context of where you're starting out from is absolutely important. So I say all that. Are we seeing a moment right now where reality is meeting the ism, and it's starting to make us have some very tough and, dare I say, uncomfortable conversations?
Yeah, I think that what you've really touched upon is this perennial gulf between theory and practice, right? I think it's this again, like an affliction of people in Poli-Sci 101, where they have all these wonderful ideas, right? And they see everything's in shades of black and white, right? But in reality, when you get into the world in practical politics, let's say, everything's a lot more gray. You very much do try to adhere to your ideology, and that very much is your guiding force, or kind of like your underlying principles. But when it comes to kind of really accomplishing things and being able to maintain something like a state, I think, like you yourself pointed out, you have to embrace things that seem to be ideologically contradictory, but in reality go hand in hand with maintaining these predicative principles that you yourself believe in, right? I think, for instance, with regards to the whole free trade thing that we were just talking about, the borders, you could take the stance that President Trump, any president, their fundamental duty is to their own state, right? And maintaining as much liberty as possible within those borders. And you could take the stance again that perhaps Canada was more of a disease or a blight or a tumor that needed to be cut away from the American body in order to preserve and even enhance that liberty, right? The president's duty, no American's duty, is to the Canadian state, right? And I think, in fact, like if you were, let's say, a state that bordered upon another state with such serious national security issues, and you didn't enjoy the relationship that the United States of America and Canada do, I think that there would be very real conversations being had, at least internally in the United States of America, about what would need to be done along that border in order to maybe help secure that state.
Man, and this is where, again, I know we just touched on this, just the idea of what should be versus what is, right? Yeah. And this is the battle that we're seeing wage right now. And by the way, it's very convenient for folks who are talking about the what should be to make their arguments, because I could say everybody should have, lollipops and puppies, and that's the world that I would love to live in one day, William. But then there's this thing called real life. And I don't know, like, and help me here, William, when we're trying to make the sale, right? Because if anything, politics is, like, I would say 30% policy and 70% selling the policy. Like, in terms of selling the policy, it seems like there's a lot of folks who are leveraging, I would call this weaponized empathy, to try and not just make their case, William, but shut down, outright, like, dismiss people's concerns. You're mentioning the national security threat that Canada may face, but there are folks who will just outright reject that and say, "Yo, William, Canada's one of our closest neighbors. They're our best friends," and they will reject the concerns entirely. What do we do in trying to, like, build some type of common ground with that type of person?
Well, what I'd point out is perhaps that I think it's 43% of Canada's youth are in favor. And this was a month or more ago, right? So that number has definitely gone up. But 43% of Canada's youth are actually in favor of annexation by the United States of America.
Really?
They believe that, 100%. Sorry, but yeah, 43% of Canada's youth, right? And that's a statistic that doesn't really get trotted out very much, because it paints a much different picture, right? Anybody who has need for hope or a future in Canada has decided that they would rather be annexed, that hope and that future don't lie within the Canadian state, right? And that's because the Canadian state is failing. I mean, our economy is in shambles. We can't guarantee national security, and our democracy has eroded so badly that I don't know if you know this, but there's the democracy index, right? Which is, again, an indicator for kind of democracy in a country, how healthy it is, this kind of stuff, right? And our score went down so precipitously, declined so precipitously in Canada, that we brought the entire score for the region of North America down so low that for the first time in the history of the democracy index, Europe surpassed us, right? So that's just how bad, let's say, things are in the Canadian state currently, and nobody seems to know it except for people in Canada. Like you're saying, there's this weaponized empathy, or kind of this I don't want to say ring of God because that's not quite right, but people see what they want to see with regards to the Canada-U.S. relationship, and even the Canadian state. We're still seen as this great peacemaker and kind of this bastion of liberal principles and multiculturalism and diversity, and that's really just come crashing down around our ears.
All those things you just mentioned, that the multiculturalism, diversity, right? Those used to be, it feels like, the metrics that people really, really cared about. And this might, I don't know, this might sound, I don't know what the right word is, it might sound like dismissive. I've never understood why that is the metrics by which we are basing whether or not a society is doing well or not, right? And I hear this all the time from folks who, especially in the more progressive, open borders mentality of saying, well, no human is illegal, right? Anybody should be able to cross an imaginary line in order to, obtain work, or, seek refuge. And I hear that, but it's like, guys, come on, like let's at least acknowledge what's happening before us. And when you see that any debate, or not even debate, just anybody who would say, hey, hold on, I have questions. Right? Can I voice some concerns? They are told to sit down and shut up. And if you don't, it's because you're a bad person, right? It's not because you have a different perspective or because you have legitimate concerns. No, it's because you're a bad person who's building their perspectives or their fears based on nothingness, right? So we're going to dismiss your concerns entirely. As a matter of fact, we're going to take all of your concerns and all the things you actually care about, and we're going to classify those as hate. So we're going to, like, in the public opinion battle, we're going to make it so you don't even want to speak out. And then what we're going to do, we're going to control all the institutions of power that allow us to communicate and have discussions around this. So you see what's been done over the past 20, 30, 40 years. And then where we are today with the resounding reaction in 2024 saying enough of this, specifically here in the continental USA. Are we at a point, William, where things are going to start, I say, going the other way? I don't know if we really have ever been to the other side of the aisle here, but, like, are we going to start seeing an actual push towards some common sense, some sanity? Are we going to see a resurgence of the progressive leftist mentality taking these edge cases and using them to become like the ultimate, like, grenade to just toss into the whole situation and blow it up? Or do we see a concern of this reaction and this pendulum swinging so far the opposite way that maybe it does usher in some of those worst case concerns, fears, and scenarios that our more vocal friends on the left or the progressive left have been echoing now for many years? Do you see any of those three outcomes being more likely than the rest?
Well, so I definitely agree with you. I think that what you've outlined is very much the life cycle of a democratic state, right? Where once security is achieved, right? Because this is very much the fundamental function of every state, is achieving this national security, the security for its people and their rights and their freedoms. Once security is achieved and kind of maintained for a decent amount of time, the state inevitably starts to push towards liberty and kind of enhancing these rights. And that's natural, right? What happens, though, is when your state is so successful as the United States of America, that push towards liberty carries on for decades and decades and decades, as you've outlined, right? And rightly so, right? Because you can guarantee security so well, you can also have so much liberty. But like you rightly pointed out, the pendulum does have to eventually swing back the other way, because abject liberty is also not healthy for a state. I think that what you've outlined even is kind of what's happened since 2016, I want to say, with regards to the word populism. I think that everybody who doesn't worship at the altar of liberalism, like modern liberal left, let's call it left-wing ideology, because it's definitely not classical liberalism.
Yeah.
That's an interesting issue just in and of itself. I think everything that's called liberal nowadays is very much illiberal, right? And the word libertarian has come to encompass essentially Lockean liberalism, like what Locke writes down the two treatises, right? It would just be called liberalism back in the day. But I think that what you've outlined is what happened with the term populism. I think that everything that isn't left-wing ideology is kind of put under this umbrella of populism, whether it is or it isn't, and discredited thereby, right? Because everybody trots out the ghoul of populism to shame and scare you away from your political beliefs if it isn't this uber left-wing ideology. And like you were saying, like there's been this domination of the media and kind of all political communication, where I think that you're unable to really express a right-wing perspective nowadays, right? Or just even just a non-left-wing perspective, I guess, in the media or just in the political sphere without a huge amount of criticism and almost consequence, I want to say.
Yep.
So you're exactly right. There's definitely being almost a censorship meted out against everything that isn't utterly left-wing.
So what's the outcome? I mean, do we see this reversion towards sanity? Do we see the left wing? It's like Revenge of the Sith, Revenge of the Left. Do they actually come back for round 35? I don't know what round they're on now. Or do we see the left wing's worst case scenarios outlined, like right wing populism, call it the right wing fascism. I hear that a lot too. Does that have a chance to become real? What do you think?
Well, I think that we're hoping that the state swings back towards something a little bit more sensible. I just using Canada as an example, though, we've had a steady national decline, like I was pointing out, for the past 10 years of the Trudeau government, and we're setting up to elect another prime minister who's utterly liberal, and essentially a carbon copy of Trudeau, if not worse. And
Mike Carney, right?
Yeah, and funny enough, right? This guy he's unelected right now. He is our sitting prime minister, and he hasn't won an election. He's not a prime member of parliament, not an election at any level. He is unelected. He's an unelected.
So he's basically the Canadian version of Kamala Harris.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly, right. Okay. And I don't know how any greater, let's say, catalyst or kind of let's say crystallization of the really severe deterioration of our democracy, let's say, that we have a prime minister, our head of state literally was not elected. And I think it's horrible, but it very much shows what I was going to get into is just that sometimes this doesn't happen, or it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, at least. And that's why I think the Canadian youth are looking to go elsewhere. I think that's why we don't really see that there's to be any hope in Canada, hope for a future, because nobody has great confidence that another liberal government, an uber left-wing government, isn't going to be elected again. And I think that that's something that fortunately has happened. Let's say in the United States of America, you guys have had Donald Trump elected. You had at least a right-wing leader in some sense take office. And so you don't have to abide by these again, leftist policies that you saw with Barack Obama that just imploded your economy. But we seem to be consigned to at least another 4 years of it. And that just doesn't bode well for anybody.
You mentioned the youth a couple times here in the conversation and being much more in favor of, I would say, the ideal of Americanism, right? And then you look in the American youth, just eye-opening, jaw-dropping percentage of Gen Z voters flipped from being in favor of Joe Biden and the Democrats in 2020 to not just favoring Trump, outright supporting Trump in 2024. And now more and more Gen Z are self-identifying, mind you, as Republican, which for me, I remember a conversation back probably 2 or 3 years ago with a former libertarian who has now taken a very large jump off a very large cliff into a very short end of the pool, mentally speaking. I digress. And that individual on the show was saying if the Republicans or libertarians want to win the young vote going forward, they're going to have to embrace climate change. They're going to have to embrace progressive social policies. They're going to have to embrace the idea of academic loan forgiveness for college tuition. And I'm just I look at what he outlined as what we needed to do versus seeing the actual results of what's happened. And I'm just like, my goodness, it's night and day. So I say all that, Michael, do you happen to see a situation? I mean, this might go this way. I don't know. You tell me, William, do you see a situation where it's the young folk who are actually going to save our societies? Is it going to come down to boomers versus Gen Z, like leftist progressive boomers versus this upstart, more right wing, non-progressive, like almost anti-progressive perspective? What do you think?
I think in a lot of ways it already has. I mean, I think there's a meme going around of somebody from Brantford, which is an electoral district or city in Ottawa. It's become some kind of boomer meme. But I think very much that is very much the case. I think that the reason, for instance, the Canadian youth are looking elsewhere to begin with is if you ask people nowadays, what does it mean to be Canadian, they'd be unable to define it outside of not American in some way, right? And in America,
by the way, what would you say it does mean to be a Canadian? I'm just curious what your answer to that.
So
question
nowadays, I think it's evaporated, right? I think once upon a time it was predicated on stuff like being a peacekeeper, very classical liberal values of again, national security, personal liberty. I think that there's often this imagery used of a cultural mosaic versus a melting pot, and I think that we did that very well, kind of being that mosaic. Very much allowing each person a little bit of space to self-determine and to kind of express themselves. And so we became this beautiful and vibrant tapestry. And that's all being, oddly enough, tamped down and just rent asunder in the name of diversity. I meant to say earlier, actually, when everybody speaks about diversity, they're speaking almost exclusively about race or ethnicity. They don't really mean diversity of perspective or ideology, right? It's almost the opposite. They want one unique perspective and everybody to look very different, as opposed to kind of everybody to look the same and to think differently. And I think that's significant.
It's significant for sure, and it's also concerning that this is the mentality that so many folks they harbored for a number of years. Like this idea that it's in pursuit of this big gray blob of, we're all the same versus, hey, I'm different. I'm told I'm different all the time, but you know what? It's those differences that I think we should be able to celebrate. It's the old MTV commercial was the Celebrate Your Differences, which if anybody's who grew up in the 90s saw that, they know I'm talking about, and probably wouldn't get the green light to go on air today. But like, yes, celebrate your differences, right? That is something that I used to think was American, like e pluribus unum, from many one, but not just all one blob of gross. It's all those individual characteristics, ideologies, perspectives, religions, like viewpoints, all of that coming together and seeing that there is value in each of those different ways of doing things. And by the way, like that's also how you keep us on track, because if the blob says we need to go this direction and this direction's wrong, right? Who's there to actually hold the blob to account? Nobody. But if you have large groups of individual religions or politics or of socioeconomic status, whatever it may be, who are loudly and proudly saying we should go this route or we should go this route. And then you can back to the idea of America to have all these little testing grounds to figure out which states are doing things better versus the others, and maybe start to look and see what those states are doing and do it better on your end, right? Like this was not a foreign idea. This was the bedrock of American civilization and foundation. And yet we're here we are today in 2025, William, and you see how that perspective has been so ignored. It's been pushed to the side. I would argue in many instances it was intentionally done so when you look at our government schooling systems. So I guess I say all that. My final thought today is that as doom and gloom, as frustrating as things have felt, I do think we're on the right path. I think we're seeing right now, especially the people, the part that's actually important, not the governments themselves, but the people around those governments who give those governments authority. They are starting to speak out. They are starting to ask questions that a lot of folks in those positions of government are very uncomfortable in answering. And good, keep them uncomfortable, right? And I guess, going forward, I do pray that we find some positives coming from the changes. But, and I do want to say this before I turn things over to you for your final thoughts, we have to be careful because the slip-ups, right? Like the one-off edge cases that could be the ammunition to be the empire that strikes back, right? Like those are the things we have to keep in mind. So for every Kilmar, illegal alien from El Salvador, who is an edge case, and it's obviously there's a lot of intricacies and nuances behind the actual situation with this one individual that's being used right now by the American progressive left to speak against what has been taking place in trying to deport the 20 plus million illegal aliens who crossed our border in a 4-year period, right? So you're going to see that there will be folks who will fight back, and we have to make sure that we're not giving them, all the ammunition that they need to turn it on us. So I guess, that's my very, convoluted, going in a circle final thought for today. I was trying to make it into a nice, neat bow. I don't know. I thought we made it work, but William, what do you have for us on your end to bring us home today? What are your final thoughts?
Well, something you said really struck me earlier, and I think kind of like everybody's special, And I think that there's kind of this fundamental tension that's really being expressed in society nowadays, and it's very much predicated upon this this lie that we're all told when we're quite young, right? The first thing I think that everybody's told when they're again quite young is that they're special, like you were saying. Everybody, you're so special. You're the most special. Everybody's unique. You're unique. You're so special, right? Then you kind of go off to school and you get educated, and almost the first thing that you hear is that everybody is the same, yep. And I think that you kind of can't have both of those things at the same time, if you think about it. You can't all be special and you can't all be the same or equal, right? And this creates a tension within each person.
But by the way, William, I'm not sure if you ever watched that movie, The Incredibles, one of my all-time favorites. That's one of the Syndrome's golden lines. He goes, when everybody's super, nobody is.
I haven't seen it, but like bang on, this is exactly it, right? Like, yep. And it just simply can't be true, right? And I think that people have to make a decision for themselves, right? And ultimately that decision, whichever one they choose to believe, I'm not going to comment on which is right or which is wrong. I think you and I stand in the same place. But you make this decision, and I think it determines whether or not you're susceptible, let's say, to communism, socialism, and kind of that type of thinking, and that's kind of your political preference and ideology going forward. Whereas if you decide that everybody is special, and that you can solve problems like kind of via your own ingenuity and ideas, you tend much more towards liberalism. Communism becomes abhorrent to you. It simply doesn't cross your mind because you understand like the beauty that lies in that, again, that beautiful tapestry or mosaic. And just that gray that you're talking about is just simply unappealing.
Yep. Oh, man, William. Well, hey, listen, I hate to put an end to such a fun conversation, but alas, we are already over our 30-minute time frame here. So with that being said, this is the part where we have to start wrapping up. I know, sad face. However, what we're going to do is make sure folks who are enjoying today's conversation can say, ooh, we can continue the conversation by reaching out to William. So, William, I know you're very big in young voices. Obviously, you're doing a lot of great work over there. You have articles going over at places like The Political Insider. But beyond that, where can folks go ahead, reach out, social media, email, if they want to continue the conversation today?
Yeah, for sure. If you guys want to send me an email, you can send me an email at william.barclay@pcbg.com or .ca, sorry. And if you want to hit me up on Twitter, you can reach me at Will Barclay BBC.
Good stuff, Will. William, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining us. And folks, I know you got some value from today's conversation. So with that being said, please go ahead and share today's episode when you do tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on Facebook, X, and Instagram. Also, The Brian Nichols Show, yes, is a podcast, but it's also a video show, which, by the way, we are airing live on Friday nights and Monday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern. We go ahead and have the show go live. 8:30, I think we get things all queued up there. So make sure you've hit that subscribe button over on X, Rumble, and Facebook. We're going live on all three of those platforms. And then otherwise, you can catch the Brian Nichols Show on the go. That's where I like to listen to my podcast. So head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it is you like to consume your podcasts. Hit subscribe. And by the way, we have over 960 episodes here of the program. And that's the only place you can catch all 960 episodes, because we've had to self-censor a couple times on YouTube, especially because they don't like some of our content from back in the COVID days. So, gotta have fun there. But anyways, with that being said, go ahead, check out some of our past conversations with some other amazing guests. And then with that being said, please support our amazing studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle, and the other folks here at the Brian Nichols Show who help keep the lights on. You can scan those little QR codes over my shoulder. That'll bring you right to their landing pages with your discount code, I think already applied there. So if not, use code TBNS at all of our amazing sponsors checkout pages, and you should get a 15%, 20% discount here and there. Other than that, folks, thank you for joining us today. I love you. I appreciate you. And with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show for William Barclay. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.